Welcome back, everyone. I know it's been a while since you've seen me, but hopefully today we're going to have a bit of fun. I have been quite busy, but we'll get to that in a moment. Instead, I'll tell you what we're going to do today. So Russia recently went out and told the world that they have a giant new truck-powered laser that can do all sorts of fancy things and damage drones and take out satellites. And, well, I like my lasers. I know a bit more about lasers than probably the average person because I've spent so long actually studying them, but lasers are cool, so why not? And so I am going to tackle them, or at least tackle those claims, but I'm not going to do it alone because today I have my wonderful usual co-host, Jen from Polymathic. So welcome, Jen.
Hi.
How are you going?
Pretty good. For those who don't know, we recently had an election like yesterday in Australia,
Yes.
and congratulations to Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party on winning. It's awesome, but that's all we're going to mention about politics.
Yes, today is not about politics because this channel is not about politics. I'm sure there's plenty of other channels for that, but today I want to have a break. I want to back away from the politics and just have a bit of a laugh at some pseudoscience or look at some of the more serious physical applications of the lasers that we're talking about. So, hopefully that gives us a little intro. Before we get into the meat of today, I think while people are still joining because the live signal only just went out, I do want to mention why it's been a while since I've actually done anything on my channel. There's been a few things going on, but the main one is just work and PhD. So teaching and PhD has just gotten so crazy that I don't have the time. I'm also in charge of trying to make videos for some of the teaching I do as well. So a lot of my editing time is going towards that. Plus, I also caught COVID in the interim, and that took me out for a bit too. And so it's just been absolutely crazy. So yeah, I can't promise a lot of videos, but I can still promise I will keep up trying to make some interesting ones, and we will tackle some pseudoscience.
and Matt and
Also,
I have an idea for a few streams like this, which are going to be fun over the now and then.
Yes, and
So
we will definitely be doing more.
hopefully we can get one, maybe one a month at least, or hopefully one a fortnight out. But don't expect.
I'm hoping that.
Be able to do. Don't expect like us doing it one or two a week. It's not going to happen at the moment. Neither of us.
Unfortunately, not. There are some days I work 12, like I do 12-hour days at uni, and it's just like, yeah. After a few of those, like, yeah, I don't have the time, but that we still have more movie debunks coming up. There's a few more movies on our list. 2012, we still need to tackle that, and hopefully we can get Maro on for that because that one is in the cards. So yeah, so for those who are in the chat, I can only see Native Atheist and Godless Granny. Welcome. I'll welcome others as we come along. I know we've got a couple of loiterers looking at the watch numbers. Hopefully that'll go up, or at least those who are here. Hopefully you enjoy this. But yeah, give them a few moments to join in. So, Jen, have you got anything you want to add, or shall we kind of get into the background?
Well, I can start the background off. Matt and I were talking the other day about some other plans that we have, which we're not going to go into because there might be some surprises there in the future. But I brought up this, and Matt hadn't seen it because he'd been so busy. And I said, we have to talk about this. And Matt goes, oh yeah, I have to talk about this. This is my bread and butter. I know all.
It's got lasers in it. Why won't I talk about it?
Okay. And then I said that was my exact thought when I heard about it. I was like, we have to talk about this. There's just no way around it. So that's the background of why this video is. But Matt can probably give you a lot more of it than that.
So there is a lot out there in science fiction about lasers and laser-like weapons and the damage they can do. You'll see them in kind of Star Wars and Star Trek and all of that. But all of a sudden, it's seemingly all of a sudden, I'll get to why it's only seemingly, Russia has just announced they've added a new powerful laser to their arsenal, which has apparently been deployed in the Ukraine. And they said, we're not going to get political. The only thing I'm going to say about the whole thing is that do not think it's a good idea to go to war ever. You know, it's horrific what's happening. But I want to take a moment to go through one of the more
And maybe
light-hearted
one other
aspects of
thing
how
is
ridiculous this laser is.
one other thing
Sorry,
is
Jen?
always take war propaganda with a pinch of salt.
Yes,
That's the other
and
thing.
as we will go through, I hope everybody will see just how much of a propaganda piece this actually is. Because once you know a little bit about lasers, you'll know exactly why I am as skeptical as I am about the effectiveness of such a device. But what is this device? What is this laser we're talking about? Well, Russia announced that they have this giant truck-mounted laser. I will get a picture of it up soon. I just need to let me get through my little bit here. And this truck-mounted laser, depending on which source you talk to, is capable of blinding drones and satellites, or vaporizing drones or destroying satellites. This giant weapon mounted on the back of a huge vehicle that you can aim. Now, whilst this might seem new to a lot of people, lasers are not actually a new thing in the Defense Force, which is probably not a surprise to anyone once you think about it. They are pretty decent defense weapons. You can use them as anti-missile capabilities at short ranges. Infrared lasers, you heat them incoming missile up and you basically fry it so it explodes too early. Lasers as a weapon against drones is not new. I even worked on a project that did proof of concept for a way to protect drones from these kinds of weapons. So
And of
we'll
course,
get into that. Sorry?
of course, lasers have been used since the 70s for targeting for
Yes.
weapons.
As
So
aiming devices,
it's a
they're
long
brilliant
time.
because they go in a relatively straight line and relative will come up
Yeah,
again.
in as straight a line as you can get light to go, because it's
But
still
yes,
light. It still has the same problems that you have with light of diffraction and etc.
yes,
I had that etc. because my brain went blank.
yes. So
Hi, Sandy.
Eddie, oh, have we got? Yes. Hey, Sandy. Hopefully, we've got a few more showing up at some point. It's good to see people again. I know this was kind of sprung on people with an hour's notice, which
Yeah,
is not normally what I do, but I got caught up last night. But we're hopefully good
yeah.
and provide some entertainment. So, lasers. What are they, and why do they make good weapons? Well, they don't. They don't make good weapons. That's the bottom line. A laser is so inefficient by nature that it just can't. It's just not a useful weapon. There are better ways. You're better just getting a solid object up to a high speed and smacking it into whatever you want to take out. Lasers, and the shorter the wavelength, the less efficient lasers get. This is not just, oh, we can't build them better. This is a fundamental law of physics. Lasers, there's two types of radiation, and I'll get to that. Laser itself stands for light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation. The stimulated emission is key because for a laser, all of the photons are basically identical. You get the same wavelength out. It's the same color. And if you look at a laser, that's why. They're red, green, blue. You get a lot of infrared lasers as well, about 1550 nanometers, which is about just over twice what the red end of the visible spectrum is. Those are used in communications for all the fiber optic stuff tends to use lasers like that. There's very distinct wavelengths, very distinct colors, and that's useful, particularly in research. It's what I do. This is how I can do my PhD. Is I rely on the fact that we get one wavelength out, and that you can easily, at least with the diode laser, manipulate that wavelength. Others, you have to build a specific chamber, but you know what wavelength it's going to be.
Plus, the light itself is coherent, so that it's more. It's not as it's not as spread out as what you find with other light sources. So it's easier to focus at what you want to focus it at. So you've got the both.
Yeah, and
Sorry, Matt.
yeah, no, that's fine. When I say identical, yeah, it's monochromatic coherent light. Now that won't mean
Yeah,
a lot to some people, but monochromatic just means one color, which is what I've already mentioned. The coherent just means that the waves kind of line up for, because photons also have a wave nature to them. So, but The way you get that is a phenomenon known as stimulated emission. One photon goes in, hits an excited atom, and you get two photons coming out, and they're identical. However, a lot of atoms will just spontaneously decay from their excited states. That's when they've got a lot of energy and the electrons have been moved around a bit, and they'll decay back down to the ground state because just like water running downhill, everything wants to reach its ground state, the lowest energy form, based on how much energy you're pumping in. And there is a set ratio of that spontaneous emission, which is not useful for lasers. It won't give us any lasering, to stimulated emission. So you, by definition, and this is not including any thermal energy you'll lose just by moving electrons around, which you will, this is fundamental law about how much energy will come out as non-useful. So we already know that lasers, by their nature, are really inefficient. And when it comes to a weapon of war, losing a lot of energy is not exactly what you want. That's why I said you're better off just speeding up a solid object, smacking it into whatever you're trying to target. So why are lasers useful in the context of drones, which is what Russia was going on about? The deputy prime minister, and I think who's also apparently the minister for war, because that's how things operate in Russia, said that they're using it to target drones, and apparently they are actually using these lasers to target drones in the Ukraine, the Western supplied drones anyway. And so why would you use a laser? And that's the bit that where all of the what Russia was saying and then how the news articles took it up starts to get a little bit messy. Jen, you were telling me
Not
about
only
this.
that, it depends which news site you went to. The more reputable ones who actually taught scientists actually got most of this wrong. Right, and actually questioned what the deputy prime minister in Russia said. But the gist of it was that the deputy prime minister said, their claim. Let's go with their claim. Their claim is that this particular laser can shoot down a drone from 3 miles or 5 kilometers. See, I'm being nice to the Americans there. So that's a fairly decent distance to start off with, but not too bad for a laser. The thing is, whilst he did say in his press conference that it would blind the drones, he also said that within 5 seconds it would melt and vaporize the drone, which is very, very problematic.
Yes, and there's a picture of the laser, and also this is from one of
The
one
truck
of the
and the
local
power
Australian news sites. We've actually seen Nine News here before because they had a bit about aliens. But yeah, here's the laser they're talking about. That's its size on the back of a truck for reference. So we're not talking something like the NIF, the National Ignition Facility, which is the largest or most powerful laser in the world. That laser is so powerful, if it got any more powerful, it would start ripping electrons off their atoms in the atmosphere. So you can't actually get stronger than that. That one's used for nuclear fusion, though. But yes, this one here. And you can see Borisov, so that's the deputy prime minister, said that there were already more powerful systems than Persevet that could burn up drones and other equipment. In a test on Tuesday, one device had torched a drone from 5 kilometers away within 5 seconds.
Yeah, that's an impressive claim.
Bull.
Crazy,
Absolute
bold
nonsense.
claim there.
Because there is one more thing that I have not mentioned about lasers yet that actually throws this, just puts the claims under just a little bit of scrutiny. And that is lasers do not, the laser beam is not parallel. The sides are not parallel. A laser beam will diverge. It will spread out. If you want, I have a video on my channel where I actually showed this with a bunch of low power laser pointers from one little mini hill to another one. You can go check that one out if you want to see more detail on it. If I remember, I'll put a link below. But that means that by the time you get to 5 kilometers, your spot size, instead of being maybe, let's say, look at the end of that. Let's say it's 10 centimeters. Instead of being that wide, you're probably looking at, minimum 10, 20 meters. So this thing spreads out a lot.
Yeah. The
Also,
divergence is quite large. Most people think lasers stay perfectly the same all the way through, but
no.
they don't.
And
They don't spread out as fast as a flashlight does, but they still spread out.
they will.
And that's the thing.
And
And it's the same amount of energy then. Well, not no, it's not even the same amount of energy because that energy has to go through the atmosphere. So those atoms are actually warming up. So the laser's warming up the air molecules on its way to get there. So it loses energy on the way. Plus, it's diverged, so now it's covering a larger area. So, and if anyone's ever seen a laser take out a balloon, now balloons are nice and thin. And assuming that your balloon is black, you might be able to pop it instantly. But if your balloon isn't black, then it's not going to necessarily absorb all the energy coming in from the laser. A lot of it will be reflected. You can take a few seconds just to burn through a balloon with a laser. Admittedly, that big laser on the back of the truck would vaporize a balloon pretty much straight away, but not a drone. And drones are built for military purposes. Most of them are made out of carbon fiber, and carbon's got a really, really high melting point. and we won't even talk about vaporization point, which goes with what the Russian minister was saying, because as soon as you start mentioning vaporization, yeah, you've lost me at that point. But turning something, most solids into vapor requires an enormous amount of energy, which you're just not going to get with a laser. Not in 5 seconds,
no,
anyway.
not also if they're indicating that this thing is portable, a truck mounted one,
Yeah.
even if it's nuclear powered, you're still probably not going to generate enough enough power to actually do any
I mean,
vaporization.
you're talking. You'd have to have gigawatt plus lasers. So you're talking about large power station levels of power going into a laser, and then you're hitting that same boundary that the um the ignition laser is having in the US. You're starting to get the point where all you're going to be doing is ionizing the air as you're firing it, and then it's not going to be any use at all because your range is virtually non-existent because all the energy is going into the air around it. You're basically just getting this little shot laser and lots of vaporized air. Um,
Yeah. Now,
it's just not.
yeah, I said if they were talking about close range, like a test at maybe 100 meters, I could believe burning a hole through a drone or burning a hole through some equipment, possibly with something like this. If you had a small nuclear reactor, you can do that. I mean, laser cutters are a thing, although those beams are highly focused. They're actually there's a lens at the end that focuses them, so it's the smallest point. Which for these, a truck mounted laser, they don't get that opportunity. Because if
It's
you try
pointless anyway.
focusing a
They want the
laser,
spread.
yeah, because the more that you focus a laser after the focal point, the more spread you're going to get back out. It's just like a regular lens. So, and also a moving target, that's going to be difficult to do, not impossible. You can have lenses that move, but you're not going to get that focus that they
Yeah,
indicate.
you'd have
And
to change the focus all the time. It's kind of pointless. Um,
yeah,
but
it's,
aside from that, if you're looking at the other side of it, which is mentioned in the interview with the Russian minister, is they were talking about blinding the drones and blinding. So I don't know how you both
yes,
vaporize and blind the drone, but it is just blinding. But when you talk about the actual focus of it, where you can blind the drone, if you've got an infrared laser and you fire an infrared laser at a drone that's designed to detect infrared, you can overpower the sensors in the drone, and then the drone becomes useless. It can't look at what it's doing. It doesn't destroy the drone though, because the drone has other ways of getting back to where it was. It just loses the ability to be used as a drone. And for that, you want a decent amount of spread because you want to make sure you're covering all the sensors because drones are moving reasonably fast, and at 5 kilometers away, you want a decent spread at that point to make sure that you are actually covering the drone. Also, it's only going to work if the drone sensors are pointing towards your laser.
Yes, although generally the drone sensors are fairly open. It is
Yeah.
actually, and the thing is, this is not a new issue. As I said, I worked on a research project trying to do proof of concept for a way to defend against lasers. Because if you know what wavelength it is, you can try and set up systems. Because the lasers, just the way by their nature, you can generally predict what wavelengths they'll do. Because there are certain systems that are more likely than others, and you get an idea
You
for
can filter them.
what you'll be attacked with. But yeah, they basically burn out the sensors of the drone and crash it. It
Yeah.
overwhelms it. You do not actually burn the drone. That's not the point. And to
But
build a
even then, you
laser
wouldn't
that
necessarily crash
powerful,
it. You would
yeah,
destroy this
even if
if they're a military zone. Generally speaking, the sensors are built in such a way that they can burn out, but the drone can still fly, and they can get it back via GPS. So, okay, you
yeah, but
destroyed our sensors, but we know where you are
I
now.
was trying to give them benefit of the doubt here, but it is a problem because they're actually, in terms of a portable weapon, particularly if you're thinking of smaller, more handheld devices, at shorter ranges it's possible. You can actually get portable lasers that will take out these sensors. So they become pretty easy. And if you've got an aiming device, it said you put them on the back of a small truck, you'd probably be able to do it at shorter ranges than this. So this would be good at taking, the sensors of drones out. But yeah, you're not burning through a drone, not at these
No,
ranges.
not at
And I
all.
don't even know what wavelength they're operating at because I haven't seen any sources that say it. My guess is it's infrared. That's most likely because you get a little more
Yeah, it makes
efficiency
sense.
and
And plus, most of the drones use infrared sensors, so they can be used at night as well as during the
yeah.
day.
So I
And
would say
infrared
it is
also makes
somewhere in there.
sense. But I mean that it's just a ridiculous claim that you could even melt it or vaporize it. I mean, what
I don't
carbon
know
fiber
what they were
has
thinking.
a melting point up in the thousands of degrees. Um,
Yeah, you
you
don't.
are you are not. It's why why carbon's used as heat shields for spaceship reentry because it can survive really really high temperatures. So you are not melting that drone with
No,
any
not
ground
not at
based
not at
laser.
5 kilometers. You might still overwhelm the sensors at that distance if you get enough light in, but yeah, you're not burning anything at that distance.
Yeah, you pretty much
Uh,
Dr. Osiris pretending to be a
yeah,
death ray to scare
hence
people.
hence the thumbnail for this video.
Yeah, it is a crazy claim. Now, I can give the benefit of the doubt to the science minister. Most like the war minister or deputy prime minister of Russia, in that generally speaking, they get a speechwriter to write speeches for them. They have a little bit of thing, and he would have no scientific knowledge at all. So he's probably ad-libbed a little bit and fluffed it a little bit. My bigger issue is with the people reporting it because you have a chance to go back and double check it, and the fact that not just a handful, about 50% of the media people who reported on this went with the whole Russia's got a death ray side of it, and I
Yeah,
find that just
they also
crazy because
Russia has a weapon that can burn. A few of them were really careful, and that they worded as that Russia has claimed this, and they went on to explain that this is not likely, or they said that this weapon could be used to take out drones, which is a much safer wording than to burn drones. But
yeah,
yes, also we got a few pointy comments that I can see that are quite
personal
relevant. So I'm
ones.
going to take this moment now that we got a few more to welcome everyone else to the chat. So we have Sandy, Uncle Beck, Godless Granny's still here, along with Native Atheist. Doc Osiris, welcome. Also, I did see a brain bug pop in to
Yep.
buzz
Hi, Brando.
briefly. I don't know if you're lurking or not, but if I've missed anyone, please feel free to at me in the comments, and I'll say hi as well. So welcome. And yes, I also have
And Titan
lasers that
Uranus.
need a key, Doc. Uh, and could a drone take out a laser? Wondering if a
Yes,
drone
easily.
could take out the laser. Yes. The one thing that you might be able to do in terms of burning is what I mentioned in the beginning. Short ranges, you could probably take out missiles if when they're close enough. If you focus an infrared
Yeah,
beam,
'cause
you can probably heat the warhead
you
up enough to
can
detonate it. But that
yeah.
has been around for decades, as far as I'm aware. You can actually
The
find
little
video on
the
YouTube
little
of those
Android units that
devices.
and I can't remember what they were called, that the US put on their warships were doing the same thing. They would
Yeah, that's what you can
that
find video
they
of
they
that.
they basically had multiple laser heads that they could swap between, so as they got too warm, and they basically just permanently tracked a missile until it got it so warm that it would set them off. They're not as efficient now because people have been building missiles to counteract that. So and that's
Yeah,
the
but
thing, war
insulation in the
escalates.
warhead and it.
But
But
hey,
that's the nature of warfare. It's always going to be a
I
back
will
and
say one
forward.
other thing about this ridiculous idea. You see how big that truck is? It is a decent sized truck. That is an incredibly big target to take out for a very expensive weapon. It is
Yes,
pure bluster because it, in terms of efficiency and cost and what you could do with it, you would be much better off with a very efficient laser tracking system for shooting missiles at drones.
probably.
That
But
that would
yeah,
make way more
again,
sense. You have a
yeah.
and you could fit a smaller truck and be way more efficient. So
But I mean, the other thing too is that if you have multiple drones coming in, this weapon could move between them very quickly, so you can overwhelm the sensors of a lot of drones from one device. But yeah,
yeah,
if it was so good, why have they only announced one of them? Uh,
I think they got 3 or
there
4,
there
but
is
they're all
some
testing
use to
units.
them, as I said, but this whole death ray burn the drones out is just nonsense. And I said, it's got about 5 kilometers. If you know where this truck is and you're versing another modern army that has missiles with a range greater than 5 kilometers, once it's fired, you can track where that beam comes from because lasers do, photons have to travel in a straight line, even if the beam diverges a little bit. So yeah, it won't take very long before you can target the truck again. But as I said, it is actually still a fairly quick weapon because it will, unlike a missile or a
Yeah.
rocket, it'll lock on immediately once you've aimed and
It certainly
fired and
has its
fired.
uses, but it's not this big no, it certainly didn't deserve the announcement it got. It was very obviously propaganda, which is unfortunate because it gives a wrong idea about lasers and what you can do with them. But let's look at the other claim of it. The other claim is that they could um do the whole sensor overwhelming thing to satellites
Yes,
from this
blind
truck.
satellites at 1,500 kilometers. Let me see if I can find one of the news articles that makes that quote. But that was what they said. Now, 5 kilometers is already spreading this beam out a bit more. It's not this focused, powerful beam that can burn through a satellite, not efficiently. And even if it could, you'd get maybe one shot, and then your laser would take about half an hour to cool down. So I doubt that. Here we go. Um,
And on top of that, I mean, not on top. As part of that, at 15 kilometers up, you're looking at a dot that's now going to be a couple of kilometers wide. You know, the laser beam is spread out over that sort of distance. It's gone through an awful lot of atmosphere at that point, and just the intensity of the laser at that height is going to be so low that it's just going to look. It might look like somebody was flashing a mirror at you from from 400 or 500 meters away, and that's not going to overwhelm anyone.
yeah, no, I'm very
Hang on,
skeptical of this one. I think it's a lot of posture. Again, you could
and
probably
that's a
still
very low
give a pretty.
satellite at 1.5 at 1,500
No, the ISS is 400. So this is
kilometers.
low Earth orbit. You're not
Earth
talking
orbit.
GPS or anything. Those are about
Yeah.
36,000.
So
But a
here's the
lot of
thing
low
about
Earth
this.
ones, a lot of
Low Earth orbit.
CubeSats operate at
Yeah.
that height. But yeah,
But
there we
these
go
sats
from
aren't
Rufus.
just moving. These sats, if you're at that level of orbit, you're moving incredibly fast to stay in your orbit.
It'll be a bit over 90 minutes, be about 100 minutes for an orbit. So it's possible to track them. You could like
It
this one
is,
here. I think
but
I'm less
we're talking
skeptical
about.
about than
But
burning.
you're also
But
talking about tracking it from the back of a tiny truck with a little laser at at that distance away from you. your ability to keep the laser dot on the satellite for long enough to overwhelm its sensors is minimal from the back of a truck. It is a push. I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't blind a satellite with that laser. If you caught the satellite when it first came into its viewing point and could track it from sitting in one position and lock it down, you might be able to make it so it's really hard for that satellite to see anything. But you're not going to destroy the satellite. You're just going to make it really hard for
No.
people to make use of that satellite. And it's even
And the
worse
thing is
if you're going to go, oh, if you're going to go, but if the satellite's staying in one spot so it can get lots of good footage of us, then you're talking about geosynchronous orbit, and that laser's going to be useless at that range.
yeah, geosynchronous is 36,000
Oh,
kilometers away. That beam is spread out way too much. Also, good luck spotting that satellite easily.
uh, it's just it's just like you're not. This is one of the things that annoys me in space battles in sci-fi. It's like space is huge. Unless, of course, all the ships are going to be close together. It's actually going to be hard for them to tell where each other is. You wouldn't have battles over huge, great big distances because the distance itself is a good enough way to hide yourself. You don't need ships with cloaking devices. You just need to paint your ships black.
Yep.
Pretty much. And you're not going to see a ship. That is the whole thing. Unless of course they get really close to you, like within a couple of kilometers, and even then, at a couple of kilometers, aiming for them before they shift out of where you've aimed for, and being at space battles are really complicated.
Your
Using
best
missiles in
bet.
space makes very
Yeah,
little
my
sense. But
my favorite weapon, if I was to have a big, let's say it's like a Star Wars, Star Trek type space
yeah,
battle, and I knew the enemy was coming with a lot of ships, what I would do, I'd grab hold of a nearby asteroid that's in a similar orbit. I would deflect its orbit so it's heading towards them. I'd plant a nuke or a large explosive inside it, and right before they arrived, I would detonate it and turn the asteroid into a giant shotgun of debris so that their ships
yeah.
come straight into this thing and get smacked by thousands upon thousands of
Debris
small,
is I mean,
incredibly high velocity rocks. Because whilst that doesn't quite have the flair of lasers and photon torpedoes and everything, or phasers and beam weapons, I think the destruction would be pretty impressive.
oh yeah.
There's
Native Atheist is talking about weapon grade lasers that can give people headaches and incapacitate them. Um,
uh
I'm going to diverge from that because this probably isn't what you're talking about. But there was work on making a taser that used two parallel laser beams. I mean, they do diverge, so at some point they stop working properly to ionize enough of the air that you could actually pass the taser through the ionized air between the two laser beams. It didn't have a huge range, but it had a better range than you know uh, throwing out the two lines. Of course, they went with taser bullets instead, but it's actually not a bad idea, and it will give you something along the lines of Star Trek stun gun, because you're basically tasering using the air itself. You're basically shooting people with a lightning bolt at that point.
but you need a lot of power. It's a
Oh,
huge
yeah, that
voltage.
is really the downside of that. It was because these things would only work plugged in. So you need
Yes, there
inert
said
power to
the,
run
the thing
them.
with
So
this is
it's like,
whilst it
yeah,
has uses for quick
and
targeting, it's not a good way. This whole destructive death ray element to this that a lot of them take up at this burning or destroying is just nonsense. It just you can't
oh yeah, yeah.
do that efficiently. Although, I have another question here. What do you think America's trying to achieve with their space force? Because this does bring that in. I the way I've because again I'm not an expert in the politics and the military going on behind here, but from what I've heard, and this was similar to what I heard when Australia tried to announce their own space force, or at least putting funding in it, on the idea of this big, like Marine Corps in space floating around in satellites or
Yeah.
giant, space-based weapons is nonsense. However, I think the main purpose or the main idea behind it is more about security, communication security. It's
Yeah.
more about protecting our satellites from attack and being able to protect space itself. It's not necessarily about actually having a military presence in space. More about it is about countering the weapons of other people to take out, say, your satellites, or to just end up turning all these low Earth orbit areas into a giant debris field within a few seconds, or losing the ability to communicate with your own troops.
Is
But
a
don't,
major problem for us even now.
yeah.
Like
And
we have
so,
so much space junk out there that it's actually getting difficult to launch because you
yeah,
have to avoid the space junk.
and I think a good part of it actually heads more into cyber than anything else. As I said, it's about the communication aspect. I don't think it's necessary. As I said, I don't. It's not about having any large number of soldiers in space. There might be a couple on some space station to manage it, but I imagine they'd be experts. We're not going to see a Moonraker style laser
Yeah.
battle for a space station anytime soon, because that's
Oh,
just
no, no, no,
not
no.
the efficient way to do it.
But I think you
However,
find there's also an aspect there of training enough military personnel in the long run, training military personnel to cope with the rigors of space, so that like in the future, if we have manned moon bases, there will probably be a small security detail who are part of that moon base, or even for even if we ever get to the point of having bases on Mars or whatever, there'll be security details because you would have to have some sort of security detail because yeah, occasionally people go nuts. Especially in
yeah,
isolation. So, yeah,
yeah,
it's
it
actually a fair
happens, but
point.
but I actually like this one boldly going forward because we can't find reverse. I like that.
That's
That I
okay.
know you're meant to be singing, but it actually brings up a good point. The velocities that you're dealing with in space are so incredible that it does not take much of an impact from anything to destroy anything in orbit.
Yeah, you also
A small
you can't do dogfights in space like you see in
no,
Star Wars or Star Trek because
uh,
they're just you can't
you
maneuver
can't
like
change
that.
direction that quickly. You cannot hit reverse in orbit because then you drop out of orbit.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So I mean,
the
yeah.
not without killing every single person on board by
Oh,
turning them
inertial
into a
dampers.
blood smear, like just this red smear on the far side of the
I
ship
love
as
the whole
the G
concept.
forces exceed a
I
thousand.
always giggle with Star Trek that we have inertial dampers. So why are you doing this whenever the ship moves?
Oh, the
Because
inertial
if you're
dampeners are
damping
failing. It's
inertia,
like, well, then you're all
yeah,
dead.
then you're all dead. Yeah, so it's like if you've got inertial dampers, you are not feeling those jerks. It's like the perfect shock absorber. You are not feeling that because
Uh, the I mean, look, I still like Star Trek and Star Wars. They're still awesome. I just, yeah, the
I
science
love
is
them.
is
If you want to see a better idea of space battles, Babylon 5 was way better. Like the Star Furies, which were their little mini, that like their version of the X-wings, they would actually, they had maneuvering thrusters as well as a normal engine for forward motion. So what they'd actually do is they use their maneuvering thrusters just to flip the whole ship around, and then they could fire their thrusters in the other direction and slow themselves down. And that was how their fight scenes looked. They would flip the ship and flip and use the maneuvering thrusters to point in a new direction, then fire their main thruster again to move to where they
yeah.
were.
You
But
could have a
inertia was
running
still a
battle
thing. They
like
kept
that
moving.
where they
Yeah.
would move past each other, but the whole battle, just like our solar system, is still moving. It's still orbiting something bigger, but within that, you could move back and forward. But the whole idea that you could just suddenly turn around and go the other way in deep space is
Shields are another thing that drive me
yeah, I
insane
saw that one.
because
The
yeah.
yeah,
Why do
there's
shields deplete? Why do you? Oh, we've only got 20% of our shields left. Your power's still working. Unless they've destroyed some shield emitters, you've still got full shields.
yeah. I've
If
also
your
the
idea is
shields
you
don't
emit,
make sense either.
Oh, they
Because
don't. They really don't.
so here's the thing: conservation of momentum is still a thing. It is still a law, and it doesn't matter what shields you have. Think about a battle line with people with real shields holding up, the big bronze shield or big wooden shield, your Roman, medieval, whatever battle you want to depict. When those, I'll get into a moment about something I hate about a lot of war movies, particularly movies set in ancient times about battle, but I'll get to that in a moment. You end up with these big shield walls crashing. Look at the impact when you have a whole charge of group of men hitting the other wall. You feel that impact. Doesn't matter what shield you have, momentum has to be preserved. When that missile, when that weapon hits you, that energy still has to go somewhere.
I can think of two really good examples of where they totally ignore that. Independence Day. You throw enough nukes at a really big ship, I don't care what kind of shielding it's got, you're
Oh,
going to
you're
A,
gonna shake
lose
it to
it,
bits.
and
I
B,
gotta
you're
find
going to
this
do
again.
some major damage to it. And the second one I'm going to do is the remake with Tom Cruise of War of the Worlds, where we've got
Oh, that one. I saw a bit of that last night, actually.
firing modern missiles at the walking tripod things of the aliens, and it's doing nothing to them. I'm sorry, those tripods are not very well designed
Oh,
for being stable. They would just fall over. They might not be destroyed, but they're gonna fall the hell over because
they
there's
might fall on their
inertia
shield,
is
but they're
a
gonna get
thing.
rocked.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's my favorite example. I just did a Google image search
Inertial
of
dampness, that's what it
of a
is.
real life system, a real life weapon. And this is actually from World War II. So this is the ISU 152. That is what's known as an SPG, a self-propelled gun. It was meant to be. It's a support weapon, so it's not technically a tank because the turret doesn't rotate. That gun is 200 millimeters across.
Mm.
Now, for a mobile vehicle, this thing was slow, by the way. It didn't move that quickly, but it didn't need to. That is incredibly big. But it wasn't the highest velocity and it wasn't designed for armor piercing. It was a support weapon. It was basically mobile artillery. You'd bring your troops up and you could smash a bunker with it. On paper, this thing was not capable of taking out the heavier German tanks in World War II. So those are the Tiger tanks. They're the most famous ones people think of when you look at when you think of World War II German designs, or the Panthers, which are actually probably one of their best tanks in terms of size versus their ability to actually build them. Tigers are a bit over-engineered, but on paper it couldn't get through. That gun was not powerful enough to breach the armor. But these things got the nickname of the Beast Killer because it didn't matter whether the shell actually got through the armor or the protective shielding of the other tank. The impact of being hit by a shell that with that big, with that much energy, also to also include the energy of the actual explosive when it went off, was so great that it basically shook the enemy tanks to pieces. Even if the
Not only
tank was
that,
still drivable, the
yeah, the
crew was
people were
not going
dead.
anywhere. As
Yeah,
I think
you
Mark
still
pointed out,
encounter
Mark Caesar
internally
pointed out.
the pressure wave. The pressure wave transfers through the shell of the tank. So even if you've got enough thing that the tank survives, the people inside are liquefied internally.
So yeah, and that's the analogy that I see when I think about shields in movies. Yeah, it doesn't matter how big your shield is. Smash it with a big enough sledgehammer, and you're not gonna have anything left. Like that's and
Because you've got two
uh,
types of ways you could
yeah,
technically make fields, and all of them rely on
one
electromagnetic fields anyway. You
actually.
either well, you can technically make shields from photons because you can have lasers control things, so you could technically, but the amount of power required would be up the levels of vaporizing stuff. So it's not
Mm,
something we could probably do. But you could technically put a bubble of ionized gas around something and use electromagnetic fields to control that to create a shield outside of your own vehicle. The Now, the downsides of any shield you make is a shield is not going to be, oh, you can go out, but nothing can come in. No, it's going to be the same in both directions. So you can protect
Yeah.
yourself, but now you can't shoot the enemy either.
Yeah, you would have to basically drop shields to attack. But again, yeah, how many shots would it take to deafen the troops inside? This was said right before I went through the ISU 180 152. There was they also had, I think, the one. They had a few tanks that were the tank destroyers like that, but that's the biggest one. But there is actually one war movie I was really happy with because they actually did that. They actually had, it was a tank movie called Iron Fury. So not the actual Fury movie. It was called it was a Russian one, and it was set during World War II. And they have a couple of tank battles. Whilst the visual effects are a bit over the top, in terms of the actual realism between the fighting of the tanks, how many shots, what tanks you actually see, that's one of the most realistic ones. They even had equipment on one of the German tanks that they did like a night vision set that they actually used. And the way they said, I was just like, the attention to detail is great. And that was one of the things they did. You can see it. They actually have it that when they get hit, even if the shell doesn't go through, you'll often see the crew like holding their heads, and like you'll hear the kind of tinnitus whining sound in the background to imitate that it's quite a shock. And yeah, shields would do the same thing. So I know this is a bit off our original topic, but hey, you can only talk so much about, hey, this laser might work to blind things briefly, but it's not the weapon everyone made it out to be.
Titan is right. Is the original Star Trek, the shields were synchronized with the phasers and photons, so they would actually drop shields to shoot. So if you were firing, you were vulnerable, which is fair enough. But if your shields were made out of ionized plasma, it would take a little bit of time for the shield to drop even after you dropped your power to them. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to try and time that and then bring the shield back up. Uh, uh, I have seen one of the other things in Babylon 5 is that most of the ships there used ablative armor. So that the armor on it, yeah, it was more like having a heat shield on the thing on something else, and then you use really thick bulkheads, a bit like modern style tanks and things like that. So you have an ablative armor, and then you have the thicker bulkheads and you have bulkheads that you can close off sections if a section gets damaged and things like that, which is more realistic. And I mean, even if you have energy weapons, then the the ablative armor will dissipate, and then you could say that you've lost a certain amount of armor because you'd have sensors on an area that has detected how much ablative you've lost, and then you can say, "Oh, yeah, on this side of the ship, we're down to only 30% of our ablative armor left. We probably don't want to take too many more shots on that side."
And it's actually like a lot of these are very similar to the armor plating people put on battleships. I like my history, and I like particularly my naval history. World
Yeah.
War II and World War One and Two is a good one. I like looking at the ships, and yeah, you look at all the different styles of armor protection that they used on those ships. It's just insane in some cases. I'm tempted to do a video on the physics behind the Yamato class battleships, the largest battleships ever to be built. They had turrets that weighed more than some of the American destroyers at the time. they just that the armor was more than a foot thick in places of just solid steel with 18-inch guns. These things weighed 70,000 tons, which is 20,000 tons stronger than the Bismarck, and somewhere between 15 and 25,000 tons stronger than a lot of the British battleships. And so it was even a good 20% bigger than I think the largest American battleship at the time, because the Americans tried to build their battleship to counter what they thought the Japanese were building, and they underestimated the Japanese by like 15, 20,000 tons as well. So the Japanese approach was, we know we can't outnumber the enemy, so we're just going to make it so that our ships can take them out, except it got to the point where they were too big and too powerful to be useful. It got to the point where the guns, didn't scale with the extra power you got. And this is also something you need to consider with a lot of these weapons, is that yes, you can build one or two of these really powerful weapons, but the resources that go into it start to drain from other areas. You're not pulling from an unlimited supply. And
it's where you're
when you have
shooting more than you are shooting big. Because you do the same sort of damage, but it's easier
Yeah,
to
and
shoot.
that's another thing that a lot of the smaller like cruiser type ships in World War II also had, was that some of them were probably more powerful than they looked because their rate of fire was so high that they could actually just overwhelm that, because some of them were dual purpose. They were meant to be anti-aircraft guns as well, so they had to have a fairly high rate of fire. But that's going to an area I need to look more into. But
Titan
yeah,
Uranus' newest thing. I'll talk about it in a sec.
which one did you want to have a look
The
at? I'll bring
structural
it up.
integrity. In
Oh
structural
yes,
integrity. Now, I actually like this one because there's some basis in fact to having a structural integrity field, because you can create complex structures. You can create complex materials that do actually become stronger when electromagnetic fields are applied to them. So there is some truth to that. You can even have structures that kind of try to form themselves back into their original shapes when you apply an electromagnetic field to them, which means you can have self-repairing with a structure. So you could have structural integrity fields with complex designed structures. And some of those structures, a lot of those structures are made out of variants of carbon fibers mixed with other things as well. So they could actually be quite strong, made even stronger by applying electromagnetic fields to them at the right frequency, so they help to hold their own thing, and that they would help. That they can also be designed in such a way that, like, if a missile hits them, they can be designed so that they give way a little bit to take some of the force and then pull themselves back into the shape they were originally, as long as they weren't completely destroyed in the first place. If you combine that with an ablative armor on the outside, you could actually make quite a good shielding system for, especially for a spacecraft, because if it can re-put itself back into place, you can keep your hull intact. Well, at least mostly intact. You'd lose it for a little bit, but then it'd go back to being functional again. So, yeah, the idea of having a structural integrity field is it wasn't something that we knew we could have when Star Trek was originally made, but it is something we could actually build now. With some of the materials that the material sciences we have now, we can actually make some pretty cool things like that. So,
yes.
plus,
But as we
yeah,
said,
sorry,
the energy has to go somewhere.
yeah,
So it doesn't
it
go into
does.
destroying the shields, it's going to shake the whole thing. And
Oh
if
yeah,
you're
it
in
is. But
space, you have no resistance against anything. It will
oh, that's
deflect you
true.
somewhere.
But that's where one
So,
good thing, if you had a structural integrity field for part of the outer hull of the ship, and you're making it out of an exotic substance that you've built, what are they called, materials that are weird, have weird properties because we've designed them for it? My brain will not think of this word. Yeah,
novel,
you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
uh,
We also do it for doing about building certain types of waveguides to make things uh, to make things that are invisible to certain wavelengths of light and things like that. We can build. Um, uh, anyway, my brain's gone blank and I can't remember what they're called, what these type of structures are called. But yeah, if you had an outer hull that could deform on impact and then put itself back together and have an ablative surface on it as well to help dissipate some of the heat. Yes, you'd lose shielding. Yes, you'd have to put a lot of energy back into the outer hull to put it back into shape afterwards. But that would actually get rid of some of the impact of the missile. You wouldn't get rid of all of it though. You're still going to shake the hell out of the ship. Um, yeah, exotic materials. Yep. Yeah, it's really quite fascinating what we could do. I mean, I don't, yeah, having something akin to a structural integrity field along with an ablative armor was probably, if we were going to build ships that were worried about having battles in space, it'd probably be the way we'd go. Um, we're more likely to want to build those things though before traveling in space, so that if we hit something whilst we're moving at a fast speed, it doesn't kill everybody on board the ship. That is a much more useful. reason for doing
Yes,
this
you
sort of thing.
punch a giant hole through a ship when you're in them when you're several light years away from Earth and you're in a bit of trouble. Just
This is one used for high-powered lasers in spacecrafts, actually. In that you can use if you've got a good targeting system at the front of the ship that can pick up a lot of the small debris coming towards you, assuming you're not going at a huge fraction of the speed of light, in which case it's pointless because you're not going to see anything coming towards you. Um, but at ships that we might be able to build over the next couple of decades, anything that we might be able to build for maybe missions to Mars or around the solar system, um, at those sort of speeds, you could have detection for smaller, certain larger, but not quite the tiniest particles of of grit out there in space, and you could have a laser array at the front that the computer system on board automatically targets those and shoots them as you're heading towards them, with the idea to vaporize them down to something small enough that your ablative armor and your integrity field, because I'll keep using that word because it sounds so good, could deal with. And that will give you a ship that could move at higher velocities through space without having to worry about destroying itself.
I think the brain being planted is actually not too far fetched. You could probably. I think it's
Even
physically possible to do something where you can transfer someone's memory, someone's
I
brain
honestly
over.
don't see why we'd have people mining asteroids. We'll mine asteroids,
Yeah,
but I don't think it'll be people doing it. It'll be robots.
yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to send people to do something so dangerous. We'd be more likely being on the space station that's nearby the where we're checking the stuff that's been collected and monitoring what's happening, and then you'll have small human crews that are near enough by so that they can monitor in real time what the robot's doing. Because if the asteroid's far enough away, having a 30-minute round time for the radio communications might not be a great idea. And whilst you might say, oh, you might have an asteroid that's between Earth and Mars in its orbit, you got to allow for the fact that sometimes the Earth's going to be the opposite side of the sun to that asteroid. So then you are looking at a good 30 minutes round time for the signal at worst case scenario.
It's about a 20-minute round. It's about a 20-minute trip for a signal from here to Mars. Well, there
Yeah,
and
at
back. I
worst,
think it
is
is.
that
It's
right?
20.
Is that worst,
Sorry.
or is that for worst time when we're on?
I have to check, but I
Yeah,
think it's
I think that's the
it's on that
average.
order about 20.
I think
Yeah.
that's the average to Mars is 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back. Um, so if you're looking at something that was in between, you'd be talking about 30 minutes probably worse time frame. And if you're getting out to the asteroid belt or out to Jupiter, you're looking at a good hour or more at the worst time frame. So at that point, you really do want you to need really, really, really good AI, which we may be able to do, but at that, I think there might be some moralistic reasons why we don't make AI that's quite as good as us. There is a fear factor that goes with making AI that's as good or better than us. And I think it could be a long
Well,
time
one of the
coming.
things though that with AI, or at least with computational systems, is that we tend to design them to do the tasks that we can't. So
Yeah.
one of the things humans are not good at doing is repetitive
Yes.
calculations that get boring. So it's actually unlikely that we'd ever need to design an AI that does exactly what humans do. There
It's
is
kind of
moves to
pointless.
try and make them more human-like in their operation. You can look at some of the new uh, neural nets that they're physically trying to build, not to be confused with a neural net when it comes to a programming method. But so that one I can see getting more human-like. But again, there will always be an aspect of it that we need them to do stuff that we can't. Because if we can easily do it, yeah, what's the point? We don't need them to be creative. We just need them to do the tasks that we can't. Maybe
Yeah.
you'd have a little bit of room for some creativity in terms of solving certain problems, but it would still be fairly
Can we
limited.
get them to vote
Um,
progressive?
I uh, also noticed this question earlier. How many things can you think of that's wrong with the Picard maneuver? I've seen it, but I'm still not 100% sure what the maneuver actually is. Is that the one where they use the warp drive to appear in 2 places in short
I can't
range?
remember which one it is either. So
From my memory, I think it's where, because the warp drive, you essentially move faster than the speed of light or you bend space-time around you. If you do it in a short range thing, you jump. So that because information can only travel at the speed of light, the information that you've moved reaches the enemy after the fact you've actually moved. So very briefly, you appear in 2 places at once. So I think it's possible, but you'd be able to tell which was the original, which was the new, because as I said, whichever
right.
one showed up last is the real one.
So Titan looked it up. The 20 minutes is the maximum. So therefore, if you were going for a asteroid in between, you'd be a 15-minute round trip on the message plus somebody making a decision. That's long enough to lose all your robots that are on an asteroid mining it. So this is why I was saying we'll end up with people in space stations or in larger ships that they can live on in near where the mining's happening, but not necessarily people on the asteroid doing the mining. So we'll have a human crew supervising robots, and it'll be a small crew and lots of robots because that
Yeah.
makes more sense.
But this whole idea of the robots going crazy and taking over, there's a lot of
Yeah,
popular media
I don't necessarily see us
and
making human-like intelligence and capabilities may evolve out of AI as a side effect of the type of AI that we're trying to make, but I don't know that it'll be actually something that we will actually
well,
directly
here's
try
the
to
other
create.
thing too with that whole thing about what would happen is that they're still controlled by their programming, and that's not something people have ignored with the new software that's being designed. You can still have it that no matter how creative they are, the fundamentals of the program stop them from doing certain things. One of the really
Yep.
common ones in terms of weapon systems is there are weapon systems now that can already identify targets and fire, but they have it in the system that they cannot fire without a human pressing the button. So you can have all this AI that even if it wants to kill us, it will be physically incapable of doing it
The
because you can
human
still
has
put
to
that in
do
the
it.
program. This whole idea that the AI will change its own programming is not possible. You can still protect. You might get cases where it does go a bit crazy and it does damage, but I don't see it being like this big wild robot revolution because again,
Oh no,
you
it'd
just
be
have
more
it. The
likely
bottom
that the
code just stops
programming.
it from
It'd be a little more
doing
likely
that.
that the code on a particular AI went nuts and it just went went loose with, and if it was weaponized, its weapon went off and killed people, but it wasn't an intentional thing. More likely,
Yeah,
just
you can
or
easily
more likely it
have
got hacked and it
yes,
was
that's
dying human.
your bigger risk is actually hacking these systems. So you actually change their targeting system, so it's still human. So I would say more realistic robot taking over something is where another human actually is controlling it still behind the scenes, where someone has deliberately sent a code that tells them what to do. Because again, it's still code, and you can always have a kill switch. You can always have it where it doesn't matter what they think or what they do, there is still the option to turn them off. And if they take certain actions, it shuts them down. That's there's no reason why you can't do that. And it's not like the people who are designing these sorts of machines would be unaware of the possibility that something goes wrong. Talk to any programmer, and they spend about 5% of their time writing the code and 95% of the time debugging it so it works
Yep.
properly. I like even when
You
I
just got
write
to be
short
really
amounts of
careful,
code
and
to
there's
read
always
my stuff,
unintended consequences. So
yeah, even when I write like say a 400 line code, which is even for me, that's actually not that's on the longer side because I only tend to use it to read results. I don't tend to or to control small things, just send commands. Even then, I'll sit there and be like, okay, this is not working. I'll spend most of my time figuring it out and debugging it. And yeah, programmers, I think for like Microsoft and Google, they often have a ratio of 50 to 50 in terms of programmers to checkers. So for every person programming, there's a person checking because you need to, because that's how it goes. And
and sometimes
yeah,
it
I
has to be
think any
programmed that
AI
cannot
that's not
debug
going to
it.
change. Yeah, I don't think that's going to
You
change.
can't, because if you spend a long time writing I've had this myself when I've written long chunks of code where I can look through the code and go, no, this should be working. This should be working. Contact a friend who was into code. He sent them my code, and within 10 minutes they sent back. They go, you got a mistake here. Okay, no, I haven't. There's no mistake there. Yeah, you do.
You have two variables you've labeled the same. It's like, oh, whoops. That's a common one. I like this one. Robots won't go crazy and take over. It's not like they're human.
But it is interesting. We've got way off into sci-fi and stupid things. But the whole thing is that the getting back to the original topic, Russia's propaganda surrounding their laser is so sci-fi. It really is. And the way the media, I mean, I don't understand it. Most of these journalists who attach to these things have people in the scientific field who they can reach out to and say, hey, can you fact check this for me? And a lot of the papers did that. A lot of the news outlets did that. I don't know why I said papers. No one reads newspapers anymore. Cheers by age.
Yeah, as I said, a lot of even the.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, it's just the delay gets in the way. I was just going to say, yeah, a bunch of the ones I read, they were very careful to say the Russian propaganda said this, and they talked about it as more of a laser that, as we said, is more capable of taking out sensors or just blinding
I think
drones.
we can mostly ignore the concept of this truck-mounted one dealing with satellites. I mean, are you talking about the little CubeSats that might be the tiny sats that they use for spying that might be at 1,500 kilometers? But those are going to be even harder to target because they're tiny. You know, even picking up exactly where they are is going to be really hard to do.
That's where the beam divergence actually becomes your friend, because the beam is a bit wider, so you don't need to be as accurate. You've got a wider area.
You need to know where it is.
Yeah, satellites. They're not the hardest thing to track, even at that height. I think, particularly the low Earth orbit ones. Yeah, I mean, it's not super easy, but they're not. It's not as hard as
my point is, if you've got a ground-based laser that's like that, that's in a particular spot where you've got all the infrastructure there to help do the tracking and everything like that for space and figure out where the things are. Yes, I can see a fixed unit like that in certain locations with all the support gear around it could be used to blind a small sat for a given amount of time, possibly, but not one mounted on the back of the truck. Not without some really good information fed to them from somewhere else.
That's like the first video I looked at was what people get wrong about lasers, and they have that James Bond scene where they nearly do give him a vasectomy from a. Although I don't think it's a Russian laser, but it's from a laser. Yes, it's unlikely. Though there are laser surgeries.
I am tempted to go down the route that we went to when we were discussing this the other day and talking about plasma weapons, because
in space that's more likely. So plasma,
I honestly think they are a brilliant weapon for use in space. A plasma weapon.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because you can fire plasma like a railgun.
The only thing is it wouldn't work within an atmosphere. As soon as you actually, or something with a lot of particles around, because once you get normal matter, it'll
heat really quickly. Yeah, you'd only be a short range weapon within an atmosphere.
But yeah, it would be a.
But within an atmosphere, a missile works so much better.
Yeah.
Whereas in space,
here's something too that they get wrong.
Aren't as good.
Here's something that people get wrong in movies all the time. Missiles do not turn around and make a second pass. They do not have that maneuverability. In a movie, if a missile misses, it will not turn around fast enough. It's missed. It's going to go off and crash. So this a lot of movies.
A helicopter. That one
watching London Has Fallen, and they had the stingers basically just turn around, do a loop, and come back. Nope. If they miss you the first time, that's it.
And movies all the time, and especially if it's like if you've got a Vottle aircraft or a helicopter, and the helicopter or the Vottle dodges the missile, the helicopter or the Vottle's actually got more maneuverability than that missile. They're going to shoot down that missile. It's done.
Yeah. I mean, the earliest time that you actually see this is World War II again with the V1 rockets. the reason that the Allies got so good at blocking them was that the Spitfires were actually a bit faster than a V1, so they could not only catch up to it, they could actually get near it. They could either shoot it down, but that was dangerous. So what they would normally do is they'd go right up to it, right next to it, and then put their wing next to it, and the split stream coming off it was enough to say, because it didn't have much in the way of corrective gyroscopes or anything on board. It was a real simple device. It was basically it just had a little propeller on the front that could detect how fast it was going. So you basically use a really basic odometer. And it was just a rocket that after it went a certain distance, it would just lock all of everything into dive and it would come down and blow up. So once you did that, you'd just wobble it and it'd just crash. And that's what they used to do, is to crash them off early. Or if they didn't tend to shoot them up too much, because if it blew up near you weren't too friendly. But that could also happen. The V2s were harder because they didn't have planes that could do it. But yeah, and that's you've probably got on board, if you're like one of those attack helicopters with the chain guns, those have got a real high rate of fire. They're pretty good at hitting a missile. And that's if you could even bother. If it's past you, it's not coming back. So just let it go.
It's even worse if you're talking about firing missiles in space, because inertia really is not your friend at that point. Your chances of being able to... You would have to plot the tracking of a missile from the moment you fired it to the location you wanted to get it to, and hope that the thing you're shooting at you haven't misjudged, or they aren't going to change velocity, especially if you're any distance from them. So yeah, it's really hard. This is why things like rail guns are way more effective in space, because you just fire a lot of things really fast.
Yeah, shotgun effect. Because you don't need to hit, you only need, in space, the velocities we're talking about so great that you only need impact by one object. And just the sheer amount of kinetic energy, a half mv squared, that's with velocity squared. So as we're talking about velocities that our brains probably have trouble comprehending, because we didn't evolve to understand orbital velocities. And it getting hit by anything is just going to rip you to shreds.
It'll be the kind of weapons that, if we ever in the future we're flying around space and we've got spaceships with our integrity fields and ablative armor and things like that for getting around, and we encounter another species and they're as aggressive as we are, and we end up in a fight with them, that'll be rail guns and maybe plasma weapons that we use. It won't be missiles, because they're not going to be that effective in space.
Nukes would probably be fairly effective at close range, but it's more for the electronic side effect of it. The actual blast effect of a nuke in space is severely diminished.
You can push a ship out of
they're still
they're going to have to expand.
But they're not the smallest devices, which means that actually storing any reasonable number of them on an attack ship is not that easy, because you also need to consider that you want your weapons to be as light as possible. It's about compact energy, and lasers are inefficient. You wouldn't use. You probably wouldn't use a laser.
You've also got to remember, even more so in space than you do on Earth, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you've got a railgun firing off an awful lot of ammo in one direction, you need thrusters in the other direction, making sure that you're not going backwards.
Yeah.
Slowing down, because you've got to compensate for the amount of forward motion you're getting off there. And you can't just do like we do on Earth, where you've got recoils that capture it and then that dissipates it over a larger area, because it doesn't make any difference. Even if you've got a recoil plate, you're still going to, it'll make it happen over a longer period of time, but you're still going to have that backwards momentum the other way from firing the device. So it'll you're still going to accelerate. But it'd be cool though, because technically if something happened with your engines, you could shift your momentum with your railgun.
Yeah, there's no reason that wouldn't work.
There's no reason you can't do that. It probably wouldn't be quite as effective with a plasma gun, because there wouldn't be as much mass in the plasma. So
it'd still work, as long as you throw anything out in another direction, it'll push you.
but not as effective as a chunk of metal that you're throwing in a particular direction. But not only that, if you've got a railgun and you're throwing a chunk of metal out with a railgun, there's nothing stopping you putting explosives inside that thing that you're firing from the railgun as well.
Yeah.
Impact explosives.
Although I'd say from a railgun, I've seen the impact of some of them. If you're talking about a spaceship,
You don't really need
explosives. The solid object's probably better because it'll just penetrate. It just goes straight through.
Oh yeah. You're going to do a massive, especially, and as you can pan a railgun just like you do a machine gun, you can just cut holes right through the middle of another ship with a railgun. The downside to railguns is all those objects you've just fired that didn't hit something are still going to be going, and they're going to keep going until they hit something, and they're going to stay more or less at that velocity that you fired them at.
Yeah, as long as deep space, the chance of them actually finding anything else is tiny. So
it's another reason why I'm not sure you'd get a lot of actual space battles, even if there are, species out there which meet each other and get into each other. The risks of doing space battles are just enormous to anyone. It really
I mean,
is.
the idea of landing and doing a battle is probably almost a bit more realistic, and there are a lot of movies that do that. I think that's the better way to go. But even then, the weapons all these aliens have these weird, like, but you look at the structure of a lot of these alien vehicles, and you're like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Or they've got all this
mind you,
body
if we're going to
armor,
talk
and you're
about
like,
sci-fi weapons, if we're going to talk about if you're an alien species and you have the ability to manipulate gravity, you have got one hell of a weapon.
oh yeah, just keep turning it on and off again, but turn it on real hard. Then you just basically get everyone to bang. But like if you can
fire
squish
gravitational waves, gravity waves, really intense gravity waves at another ship, you can tear it apart just with the changes in gravity from the gravitational waves.
It'd be like you'd probably be the equivalent of a submarine reaching crush depth. It'd just implode if you got it right.
Yeah. So gravity as a weapon is just an insane concept. It's one of those
But
things
it's
that if you
unfortunately
had
not one that you could manipulate. I think the amount of energy that you'd need, because even the small gravity waves that we detect here, we're talking about several times the mass of the sun being converted to pure energy. So that's E equals mc squared. That's the kind of conversion. So like several suns worth of energy. And that's not to talk about how much the sun is capable of burning up in 5 billion years. Well, it's actually longer than that, but it'll be 5 billion before we have to leave if we haven't already. But the actual mass being converted, there is no way a spaceship's probably going to have anything close to that. There's also the whole aspect
of concentrated energy in an area is no different to mass. So basically, you're creating mass in an area, and that's going to affect everything around it, not just the thing you're shooting at, but you too.
So that I don't think that one's a very useful weapon. If you consider that, you somehow need some way of you releasing it slowly but concentrating it suddenly.
The concept that in nature, gravity only gets manipulated by massive amounts of matter or energy in a particular place tends to suggest that is the only way that we'll ever manipulate gravity. You can manipulate inertia through variant motion, but inertia is only quasi similar to.
I was gonna say goodbye to Gary. Sorry, just well.
Bye, Gary.
If you're still there.
I mean, yes, gravity is a product of inertia too, because things move in straight lines, and but yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, it's that the concepts that these will be the ways that we do things. It's really hard looking at the physics that we know now and extrapolating what we might have in the future. Even concepts like warp drive and things like that. Even though there are physical concepts that we have within relativity, and even some experimental evidence that things like warp, it might be possible to make a warp drive.
Theoretically, it is possible to do a warp drive, but
the energy requirements are still huge. and probably unrealistic for us to ever have, to be able to make a warp drive that would be big enough to do something. Now, there was one thing I saw in Stargate, which didn't talk about warp drives, but it could conceivably be possible if you can warp a small area of space to warp a small enough area and then pass a laser through a warped area of space as a communication device to give you what would effectively be a faster than light form of communication. That's conceivable because you're only having to manipulate a very small area. Conceivable, unlikely, but conceivable. I think we've got much more chance of ever developing a faster than light communication than we actually do faster than light travel.
Probably. Though the universe still doesn't like information being passed faster than the speed of light, but
No, it doesn't.
again, we probably don't. Yeah, I'm curious to see where that one does go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those interesting things where it's hard to see with the way that we've got with our knowledge of physics at the moment how we could have things that go anything that goes faster than the speed of light. But you've got to remember in that we are things of the universe that are held to the rules of the universe that we live in. That doesn't mean there can't be aspects of beyond what we can perceive at the moment that don't follow the exact same rules as what we see within our known universe. That's not talking in a sort of supernatural thing. It's just things that we have no way of observing at the moment. We don't know these technologies. It's not a case of we can't glimpse at them. We don't even know them because even if there is something beyond, we can't see it at the moment because we don't know how to. We surmise that there may be things beyond that, like alternate, like a multiverse, like extra dimensions and things like that. But we can't see any of those things. We only have scant evidence for any of them, and it's very hard to make a new type of technology based on things that we have scant evidence for. And that's what it really comes down to. So we can think that there might be possibility there for things to happen, like the concept of cosmic strings. Like if cosmic strings exist and we have a way to manipulate cosmic strings, you could conceivably send messages along a cosmic string at a speed faster than the speed of light. Conceivably. But they'd have to exist first. We'd have to prove it.
Yes, we
And
haven't
you'd have
got
to
that
figure out a
far.
way to manipulate them too without destroying the universe because they're an underlying structure of the universe. If you manipulate an underlying structure, do we destroy something on the part of the universe we exist in? You know, there's ifs,
Assuming
ands,
we
or
could actually
but,
manipulate them.
and that's the point. Yeah, when you're dealing with something at our level, it's like there are so many reasons why the speed of light is a limit, and part of it is the nature of matter itself in our universe, because everything is made out of the same stuff, and all this stuff is held by the rules of the way that light works, because energy and matter are interchangeable, and that so we are limited by the structures that are actually in our universe, so that you can't push something faster than the speed of light because of the nature of the matter within the universe itself. It is a fundamental property of the universe that we exist in, but we don't know if there's an underlying structure beyond that. There is hints in quantum mechanics that there is structure underneath what we perceive as the lowest level of structure, and that's no different to 100 odd years ago when we thought atoms were all about protons, neutrons, and electrons, and nothing else. You know, it's no different to think that maybe quarks and that are all made out of something that's even smaller, and that there's the underlying structure there that defines something else, and that has a different set of properties to the universe that we deal with on a daily basis. But it's going to be related to the products of the universe that we live in. Where I'm getting way off topic, aren't I?
I'm just thinking that's probably its own video. We should probably
Yeah, it
actually
kind of is.
set a
We
topic and
actually should probably talk about that. We should
Because
we should talk about that and maybe drag somebody else in who's got even more better physics knowledge than that side of physics knowledge
yeah,
than you
it's
and I
not
do
my
to
side of
discuss
physics,
it.
unfortunately. So I can sit here and speculate, but I wouldn't really know what
Which
I'm
is all I'm
talking
doing
about.
as well. So, but yeah, I mean, we have a good grounded knowledge, but it's yeah, it'd be nice to talk to somebody who's got more
Although
grounding.
I think on the note of having that as a video for a later date, we'll probably finish up in a couple of minutes, so we
Yeah, I
should
think
draw
we
to the end
should.
because we're getting to that 90-minute mark, and that's where I kind of want to end it. So
Yeah.
I guess the summary.
Well, we can't summarize all of
Lasers
this.
don't
We will
burn.
get way off
These
track.
lasers won't burn things. They might be able to blind a drone and briefly overwhelm a satellite, but they're not going to do that much damage. And then a lot of sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, especially
Weapons
from
in
news
space, just
outlets.
use a railgun.
What
I think
I
that's the
mean, I
summary I got.
understand. We do understand it's propaganda from Russia, and that's to be understood. And you can give a little bit of leeway there, but to report the propaganda as is in outside of Russia is just crazy. I just don't. I don't get it. Why would you do that? I mean, that comes down to scaring people. And why would you want to do that when it's not so obviously not real?
I have no
Not real
idea,
in that
but
sense.
yeah, particularly when you kind of have a. It's better to do the opposite.
Yeah,
But
it would
oh
be
well.
better to play it down. And it's not hard to play down because the science is there to play it down. So that's the thing. So to news outlets like Nine and the few others who did it too, double check your stuff before you put out things like this. Don't just read into the propaganda. That's just crazy. Um, and anybody who sees anything like this, double check because I'm pretty sure somewhere there's going to be somebody who actually went and spoke to a scientist, and they're going to say, "Yeah, no," because yeah, look for confirming news sources because our news sources are not always accurate.
No, I wouldn't believe it anyway until they showed me the divergence calculations, the energy per cubic meter, per square meter.
And the power supply for the truck. It's really interesting. There, somewhere in amongst all that, there's actually footage of them driving the truck out with the laser, and they drive another truck out behind the laser.
Yeah, it needs
So
a
I'm
separate
like,
power supply.
see, it's a separate power supply. So there's one truck for the laser, one truck for the power supply. Now you've got
I've
two targets, and neither of them destroy the laser.
the lab next to me has a UV laser that's only about in the order of about a watt or so energy, and it has about as many boxes and control panels just to control the power supply as this setup in the screenshot behind me.
Yeah.
It's like a whole, like almost like half a wall's worth of boxes. Just the laser itself is not that big, but the rest is just power supply. So yeah, I'm not surprised they'd need another truck.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long
Yeah.
they'd get out of the laser itself, because a lot of those powerful lasers, the equipment heats
They
up.
burn out.
But yeah,
Yeah,
as I said, the
because the
NIF
heat that
can
you're
only fire
create.
every half an hour at most, because it takes it fires I think once, if it's said every hour or so, and then but it
Yeah.
takes about half an hour for the equipment to cool down because you got to recharge everything back up as well. They're like you fire
That's the
in
other problem.
bursts at that power.
You're focusing that much energy, you're actually going to be damaging the thing that you're focusing with as well. Especially if you use it for prolonged periods of time. So you might not be able to shoot down multiple drones with this because after you've knocked off the first one, you might have to rest the laser for half an hour for it to cool down.
Well, it depends for how long you're firing, and I still like they're not going to say what the intensity is. I don't have
No, of
details
course
about
not.
that. If I can somehow figure out what type of laser it is, like what wavelength, and
You could
which
probably work
is
it out. It'll be
it's
infrared.
not.
It has to be infrared.
Oh well, I know it's IR. It's just exactly what type. Because if you know what the gain media is, that helps a bit too. You can then figure a few more things
making them
out.
IR actually helps in their calculations too because it's easier to make the IR laser and
It doesn't diverge quite as much. I don't think. I have to. I think the
so there are
yeah,
advantages
wavelength is
to it,
no.
but
No. Other way around. Actually hurts the
Is it?
divergence.
No, but there
Wavelength is
are
on top.
advantages. There are advantages in the production
It's
of
more
the infrared
efficient. You'll
laser
get more of
it's
that
more
power in
efficient.
at the
Yeah,
longer wavelengths, but
which
it'll
means you
spread
can
out
get your longer
faster.
distances and
But
everything.
I think the ratio that you're looking at is still in your favor because you'll end up with more energy than you'd lose from the divergence. But neither of those is your friend, even under the best of
No,
circumstances.
this is your friend. I mean, in all honesty, if you're gonna have to drive out 2 trucks so you can power this thing, as I said, why don't you just have a good computer system with laser targeting and missiles to shoot down the drones? Because you could fit those 2 trucks out, and you'd have 2 separate trucks that could do the same
Maybe
job.
reusability is something. The missiles are still really expensive.
Expensive. Well, that's true, but yeah.
Even the small
All right.
ones. So that would be my
Mount a
guess. But
rail. We'll go back to the railgun. Mount a railgun on the back of the thing, and then we can just shoot it down with railgun.
anyway,
Yeah,
I think that's enough
we don't.
of us for the moment. But do you have anything that you want to shill quickly before
I
we
don't.
close up?
I'm hoping I can get some more stuff done over this week. I want to get a. I want to try and get a video or another stream out this week, but I'm not confirming that or when it's going to be. So, follow me on Twitter. That's the easiest way. And yeah, I've enjoyed this. This is fun. I've missed this map.
It has been fun, but as I said, I have to close it up. I know what my next video will be on. I just can't promise when it's gonna be out because I have so much on that it's gonna be difficult. But I do want to do one if it's possible on what does a scientist look like. That's my goal for the next scripted video. The next live stream, I might do a Q&A session sometime where people just ask me whatever they want. And we still have to do a couple of bad science in movies. We've got a couple
Oh
lined
yeah, we
up.
got a
So
couple of those.
keep those in mind. Any last words, Jen?
I think we covered it.
In which case, remember, I'm almost a doctor. Until next time, be like a proton and stay positive.